what do you have for us in critical thinking?
Well, I want to tie into this German-France argument and talk about the difference between communism, socialism, and capitalism, because I think they get thrown around quite often. So let's just start with communism, because it's the one we probably, the people who are watching this, probably know least about, except,
right.
It's bad. So communism, the keystone was Karl Marx's manifesto. And if you haven't read it, you should read it, because it's quite a page-turner. Seriously, I mean, you start reading this guy and he sounds like he's so in tune with what everybody's thinking and how we should all take care of, all our problems and work together and so on, until about the third page. And about the third page, he says, and the way to do this is to take away everybody's personal property.
So it's all about property rights.
Yeah, well, it really, almost a very large measure, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of it is a large measure is property rights. In other words, can I have more than you have? And in communism, the idea is like,
equal.
no, we want to be fair here, so we all get, very similar stuff. And of course, that provides no incentive to work harder. So it's not, aren't as productive as you could be. And in fact, when we were in China, right, we saw people driving really slow, and we asked, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's a government worker. He doesn't have any incentive to drive any faster." And so even in China, the people we're talking to, they're pointing to him, and he goes, "Oh, he's the, the slow driver." And you're like, well, why go more than 40 miles an hour if I'm going to a job and get paid the same the whole time? So that whole idea of incentives and getting ahead doesn't matter if you have the same house and have the same car and have the same life as everyone else. Why work harder? And of course, that leads to lower productivity. China isn't really totally communist.
No,
right?
It's not.
Not even close anymore. So if you look back in their history, there's a famous quote from Deng Xiaoping that says, whether it's a black cat or a white cat, it really doesn't matter as long as it catches mice. And so that was essentially the signal, like...
to keep people working.
Yeah, to keep people going and keep everything going. It's like, okay, we don't want to just say communism's it. You can also be doing other things. So if you want to be a different kind of cat, that's okay. So it's kind of like blessing some capitalism.
You can have a little bit of your own business.
A little more and so on. But they want stability. I mean, the real thing about China is they want stability in their life. So that's kind of communism. I mean, basically, if everybody wants to share the same thing, everybody can have the same miserable life. Is the way some people would put it. So it's not a good idea. It definitely has been discredited over history in example after example. I mean, nobody wants to go back to communist Soviet Union. Nobody certainly wants to go to the dictatorship of the North Koreans. I mean, that's a miserable life. They don't even have electricity.
We don't want shared misery. So what about socialism?
So socialism is a good question. So socialism is mostly state-run businesses. So if you think about you can own personal property, but you really just own the major industries. So, a socialist government like Chavez in Venezuela, he owns the oil, or he doesn't own, but the government owns the oil company.
He's been buying up.
Well, yeah, he took over the oil company and simply said, well, the people own the oil company, the other people, individuals.
And mining. And
mining and banking and everything else. The people own these businesses, not individuals. So, again, you have an incentive problem. You have big state-run businesses, but they don't really have an incentive to innovate. They don't have an incentive to move forward.
Now, what about France?
Well, that's a good question. So France has some socialist tendencies, and in fact, some of their industries are subsidized by the government. Not that some of ours aren't either. I'm not saying that. But now think about this. France had the internet and email before we did. They had it.
Shocking.
They had it. They had these little terminals in their phones and everything. They didn't push it forward. Why? Because the state-run phone company had no incentive to go out there and do all this. We used to have it wasn't really a state-run phone company, but we used to have one phone company. They broke it all apart, and what did they get us? A big technology, telecom boom as they started competing with each other. So the competition fuels the growth, right? So we want to move as far towards competition and trying to top the next guy as we can. And of course, that means we have to have incentives. So we don't want incentives like, that's the only thing that can happen in that business. We want to be able to say, hey, if you want to own a golf course, you could own Pebble Beach, or you could go up the coast a little bit and build Bandon Dunes and have your own golf course. Well, that's not a state decision, that's a personal decision.
So capitalism.
excuse me, capitalism is where the problem, and where people are having problems with it, is people get left behind and things are nowhere close to equal. So if I can have property, I can have more property than you, and I can keep more property than you. That means you don't have the same life I have. So I own Pebble Beach and you don't. I'm not going to let you play.
Let's protest.
Yeah, well, that's one way of looking at it. But capitalism does not even come close to equality. That if you want equality, you want to go back towards socialism and communism, where everybody else gets the same stuff as you do, and there's very little incentive to go ahead because you're not going to get ahead. So when you think about capitalism, yes, it's harsh. It's a much harsher life. You have to be productive. You have to compete with the people next to you. You have to compete with the other people in society to work harder and have more people value your services and work to give you more money, and then you have to keep that money invested into things that go up in value.
So it's about trying to get a better life?
Well, that's exactly it. So the difference between communism, socialism, and capitalism is that if you want an equal life, you tend towards communism. If you want to have some winners and some losers, but the average be higher, you lean towards capitalism. Because the average life as a capitalist country is much higher than the average life in the communist country, because we have incentives to get ahead. So when you think about it in those terms, you kind of get a perspective of why France wants to nationalize the pain.
Yes.
And Germany wants, hey, I paid enough, that's it. So if you think of it in those terms, it might make sense to you on why France and Germany argue about these things. It's because they come at it from a different angle on what they think is fair.
Interesting take. And what's your takeaway?
What's my takeaway? So capitalism isn't the system where everyone has the same outcome. Some say that's not fair. But it's the system that creates the highest average standard of living and the best one, at least in my opinion, that's ever been invented. We're capitalists, so get in the game.